What began as just the week of the Summer Games Fest has spiraled into a maddening cacophony of game reveals, more game announcements and trailers than you could have ever imagined, all within the span of like a week and a half. There are no less than 11 different showcases, 12 if you count the Steam Next Fest as one itself. It's totally insane to go through every single showcase. I live streamed the Summer Games Fest and that was already like 2.5 hours. I will be covering 11 of these different showcases and telling you about the games I find most interesting from them. As for the Steam Next Fest, those always get their own dedicated videos. That said, if you want to watch me cover the current Next Fest, you know, June 2024 Next Fest, then there's a link in the description down below. But before that, if you like this video or any other video I make, please like, subscribe, and share with all of your friends. Spreading the good gospel of high-tech low life lets the YouTube algorithm know that I'm doing well. The first game I want to talk about is the LEGO Horizon game. So the LEGO Horizon game was a game that I'm sure no one asked for, but in a strange twist of fate, it might actually be the most fun Horizon's ever been, personally speaking. The game was also extra notable because it's the first PlayStation game coming to Nintendo Switch, unless of course you count MLB The Show, which I don't. Anyways, the LEGO games are generally pretty fun and I'm sure this is no exception. Personally speaking, I think this will run quite well on Steam Deck. The next interesting game is Civilization 7. The Civ games are pretty fun. I've played them, I've dabbled in them a little bit. I'm not like super into 4X strategies, but I mean, they're pretty fun. I suppose the big issue is whether or not this will run on Steam Deck, because honestly, I'm veering on the side of no. I mean, to be fair, they didn't show us any actual gameplay, so we don't know for certain. But I mean, it is a modern AAA RTS, and RTSs aren't the best on Steam Deck, performance-wise anyways. But hey, at least I'll probably be able to run on my PC. Next up is Black Myth Wukong. It's a Souls-like, but based on Journey to the West. You know what else was inspired by Journey to the West? Dragon Ball Z. Black Myth Wukong does look really cool, and honestly, it might be one of the better Souls-like, but it really depends on the game feel. It looks great, but at the same time though, part of me wonders how it actually feels in my hands when I'm playing it. As for whether or not this game will run on Steam Deck, I have no faith that it'll run on Steam Deck. At least, not very well. I could be wrong, I could be pleasantly wrong. But part of me thinks that this game probably won't run that well on Steam Deck, to be honest. The next game I'm excited for is Metaphor ReFantasio. It's Atlus's new RPG, and it's a new IP. One could argue that it's Persona 6, but unlike the Persona series, there is no romance in the relationship and social link system, so it's entirely platonic, so no, it's not Persona. In the RPG department, Sega and Atlus have been killing it together, and honestly, this might be yet another amazing release. As for whether or not this game will run well on Steam Deck, I have reason to believe that it might run well. Persona 3 surprisingly had some performance issues, but I think they got that resolved. So I'm just hoping that this time around it'll run great out of the box. Otherwise, you could just play at 30 FPS. I mean, it's a JRPG after all, right? Now let's talk Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter 6 already runs pretty well on Steam Deck, so we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about guest characters in Street Fighter 6. Both Terry Bogard and Mai Shiranui from the Fatal Fury series are coming to Street Fighter 6. It's something I would have never imagined outside of like another Capcom vs SNK game, which by the way, they should make Capcom vs SNK 3. But the fact that guest characters from different franchises and even different companies can just waltz into Street Fighter gives me a lot of hope. Who else could they add to Street Fighter? Because at this point, they could add whoever they want. Do you want 2B in Street Fighter 6? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but she's in Soul Calibur 6 and Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. May as well put her in Street Fighter 6 as well, right? A new Dragon Ball Z Budokai game in this day and age is pretty cool. I want to play it. I don't know if it'll run well on Steam Deck. I'm sure it'll run pretty well on Steam Deck, but that remains to be seen. There isn't too much to talk about here because everyone knows the Dragon Ball Z story, but I mean, hey, new Dragon Ball Z game, and it's not a Xenoverse game. I just wish they made a Dragon Ball FighterZ Z too. On the topic of fighting games, let's talk about the new Fatal Fury game. They announced a couple of new characters. They're bringing back all of the old characters from Fatal Fury and also all of the characters from Garo, Mark of the Wolves. Man, honestly, it looks like a pretty good game. I want to play it. As for whether or not it'll run well on Steam Deck, I have no reason to believe that it won't run well on Steam Deck, but given how complex SNK combos can be, you might want to grab a fight stick for it. The new Power Rangers beat 'em up looks pretty cool too, and this goes without saying, I'm sure this will run great on Steam Deck, 60 FPS, maybe even more. Depends on if you can uncap the frame rate. These sorts of beat 'em ups don't tend to be super in-depth, but I mean, they're still quite fun, especially with friends. You need friends to play these games. After this was Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and I'm gonna level with you, I had a ton of friends that heard Joff say Kingdom and then they thought, oh, it's Kingdom Hearts 4. Nah, they got debated and it was the funniest thing ever. I must confess, I've yet to play the first game. I have it on Steam. It was gifted to me. I haven't touched it yet. I don't know why. I probably should. This game looks pretty cool, but it might be a little too cool to run well on Steam Deck, to be honest. I could see lowering the graphics down all the way down to low settings, everything. Maybe you'll be able to play at 30 FPS then, but other than that though, no. Slitter Helm is interesting. It's helmed by the guy behind Silent Hill, and honestly, I was expecting more of a Silent Hill type of game rather than like a horror action game, but I kind of dig it. It's like that one manga, Parasite, the Maxim. It does look cool and somewhat less graphically demanding than, say, a lot of other AAA titles, so yeah, I'm gonna say it probably runs pretty decently on Steam Deck. You will have to lower some graphical details though. And of course, the most controversial game, Killer Bean. Some people really like it, some people really don't, and I think I really like it too. The people that don't like it, they just don't know how to have fun, you know? It looks pretty cool. I don't know if it'll run well on Steam Deck due to all of the crazy physics calculations, especially with the waves. Do you see the Wave Rider section of the trailer? It looks crazy. But hey, maybe it'll run well on Steam Deck, and maybe I'm just being pessimistic. Monster Hunter Stories coming to Steam is pretty cool, but I've always preferred the action-oriented Monster Hunter games, you know, the traditional ones. As stated before in one of my previous videos, I do think this game will run pretty well on Steam Deck. Sonic X Shadow Generations looks really cool. I haven't played a Sonic game in forever. I mean, I've played Sonic Mania, but I haven't played a 3D Sonic game in forever. Will it run well on Steam Deck though? That remains to be seen. I'm personally erring on the side of yes. Also, I'm surprised at how big the Sonic modding community is. I never realized how prolific modding Sonic games actually was, and it sounds like something I might need to explore in the future. For the Sonic games I do own, that is. Dark and Darker is returning to Steam. Remember the Nexon lawsuit? The lawsuit that supposedly Dark and Darker was made with stolen Nexon source code? Apparently, that lawsuit's been dismissed, and Dark and Darker is allowed to be back on Steam. I thought the game was very fun, so yeah, it's great news. It's great that it's back on Steam. It's been about a year since the game was ultimately removed from Steam, and now that it's back, I don't know what's changed. I did play the Next Fest demo a while back, and it ran pretty well on Steam Deck, but it had no controller support, so it wasn't really suitable for the Steam Deck, given the amount of mousing you have to do. Given it's been about a year since I last played the Next Fest demo, it might not run the same anymore. It might run better, it might run worse, I don't know for certain. I'm erring on the side of it might run worse, but that's just me. There's also a good chance that this game might add an anti-cheat that is simply put unsupported on Steam Deck, and that's going to be the case because it's an extraction shooter or an extraction hack and slash. But hey, if the anti-cheat does in fact work on Steam Deck at full release, then that would be great. Next up is Capcom's brand new IP, Kunitsugami, The Path of the Goddess. It may look like a hack and slash, but there are reports suggesting that this might actually be a tower defense game. But I'm gonna make it a crazy prediction. You heard it here, folks. I think it's gonna be more like Pikmin. It's even got a similar camera angle to Pikmin, which is why I'm saying it. Now, I could be totally wrong, but I'm just gonna put it out there first. Anyways, will this game run well on Steam Deck? Probably if you lower the graphical details. But depending on how crazy the screen action may be, it might not run well on Steam Deck. Tower defense games, much like RTSs, can be notoriously CPU heavy, especially if there's a lot going on. Palworld's getting a new update. Palworld already doesn't run that well on Steam Deck, though I think there might be mods to make it run better. I'm not entirely sure. Whatever the case is, Palworld's getting a new continent, Sakurajima. It's basically Japan, but Palworld. There's also Monster Hunter Wilds, which looks great. And honestly, I'm gonna play it. I think the most exciting game in this entire show was Phantom Blade Zero. It looks like Sekiro. Some are worried that the combat has no depth to it, but it already kind of looks like Sekiro. And I don't mean just the looks, I mean like there's a health meter and there's also a posture, or I guess a guard gauge or whatever. Now, I don't necessarily know if the mechanics are identical to Sekiro or even very similar, but whatever the case is, I'm gonna give this game a shot. I really want this to run well on Steam Deck. I really do, and it might because it looks like a more linear game, but I could be wrong. It could not run well on Steam Deck, who knows for certain. So this covers the Summer Games Fest portion of the video. As you may have noticed, I skipped over a lot of stuff, and that's because I wasn't interested in it, especially the Inside Out 2 trailer that they showed us. I get it, it's great that Yang Ye has a role in a Hollywood movie, and yeah, that he has a spot in the Summer Games Fest, but like, come on, dude. So now let's talk about Day of the Devs. Day of the Devs is another showcase of games, but this time focused almost entirely on indie games. While I'm sure this showcase has games for any of you guys that you may be interested in, personally speaking, I was not interested in any of them. Not a single one, and that sucks for me. None of those games appeal to me, but honestly, I encourage you to watch the live stream. You might find something you like. I certainly didn't though, so yeah, we're not going to cover them. Devolver Digital also had its own show right after Day of the Devs, and there was one game that looked really interesting. Tenjutsu. It's an action roguelike game, and yes, I get it, it's another action roguelike, but hear me out. It looks pretty sick. I know a lot of people were really disappointed that we had this cool anime cutscene only for it to be a pixel art game, and yeah, I get it, but at the same time though, the game looks pretty fun. I'm gonna play it. I don't know about y'all though. Will it run well on Steam Deck? Probably. I would imagine so. I hope it does. And that covers it for day 1 of the game's coverage. But this video is not over yet. All of these showcases happened on June the 7th, but there was more the next day. So now let's talk about part 2, all the showcases that happened on June the 8th. This day started off with the Future of Play Direct, a show showcasing games, I guess, coming to the future. The whole live stream itself has a very Toonami-esque vibe, featuring a VTuber as a host. Man, I could do this. I should do it. I want to do it. I want to host something like this. The first game they showcased, and a game that I'm very interested in, is a game called Abyss X Zero. The game definitely evokes a sort of Mega Man Legends vibe, though it probably doesn't play anything like it. I'm not really sure what else to say besides the gameplay looks pretty good, but hey, will it run on Steam Deck? Probably. Slay the Princess is one I've actually covered in the past on the Steam Deck, and yes, it's a visual novel, yes, it runs well on Steam Deck. The main takeaway here though is that it's getting a free update. The pristine cut is free for all of those that own the game already, though it's coming out with a new physical and collector's edition on consoles only. All I'm saying is PC gamers want some of that cool stuff as well. They want some of that collector's edition love, you know? Anyways, the game's pretty neat and it runs well on Steam Deck as stated before. The ending also had a showcase reel for some games that didn't have their own full trailer. The first of which is Retro Gadgets. It's a sandbox game where you design retro gadgets and you refurbish them and you fix them and all that other cool stuff as well. The game is more accurately designed a device for Retro Game Core and Wolf Den to review. Probably runs well on Steam Deck. There's also Margin of the Strange, which is a game made by the guys that made One Shot. It looks like a very unusual, sort of esoteric type of game, much like One Shot itself was. I'd be more surprised if this didn't run well on Steam Deck. There's also Ra Ra Boom, which is a beat 'em up, and it looks fun. I mean, definitely play with friends, obviously, but it looks fun. Probably runs well on Steam Deck as well. I don't know what else to say about it. And of course, Geno Kids, which looks like a sort of tag team Devil May Cry style game. Honestly, man, I want more action games that are more in vein of Devil May Cry. Anyways, Geno Kids looks fun. It looks like it can run well on Steam Deck, probably. So that about covers it for the Future of Play Direct. Now let's talk about Wholesome Direct. Now, longtime viewers know my hot take that I think cozy games kinda suck, or at least they're not for me. So I was really tempted to skip this entire showcase, but I had to watch it, see if there was anything that appealed to me. I found one game that appealed to me, Opus Prism Peak. While the game has very comfy vibes, the game itself feels more like a mystery game to me, and mystery games are always pretty fun. I will say it is disappointing for me that I don't really like cozy games because they seem like the kind of games that you want to play when you need to relax. But I'm of the firm belief that stress from a video game can make it better. Whether it's stressing about how hard a level is or stressing about story choices that might kill your favorite character, the stress makes the game very real and very immersive, despite the game potentially not being, immersive. Anyways, the next showcase is the Latin America Game Showcase, or the LAGS, if you will. The Latin American Game Showcase is a showcase for those developers based in the various Latin America countries, many of which I've actually covered in the past, such as Mullet Mad Jack, Dungeon Drafters, and even games that were showcased in prior showcases like Abyss X Zero. But I'm not going to retread existing ground. Let's talk about the new titles that they've announced during this event. First and foremost, of course, being Mariachi Legends. It's made by the same guys that made 9 Years of Shadows, and I thought that was a pretty good Metroidvania, but when I played it, it kept glitching out, so that had unfortunate issues with the Steam Deck. I'm sure they fixed it by now, and that I should probably actually play it again. But anyways, I liked the game when it wasn't glitching, so that's good. It's said to be an action platformer, but I don't know if that means it's a Metroidvania or just a linear platformer. Either way, I'm gonna try it out. I'd love to try it out. I'm hoping this works quite well on Steam Deck and that I can finish the game from start to finish, at launch at least, on Steam Deck. Next up is Goblin Cleanup, which actually has a demo just in time for the next fest. Anyways, so you take the role of some goblins cleaning up some dungeons. You have to clean up viscera and all that nasty stuff. But of course, this is a dungeon, so try not to get killed yourself, otherwise your teammates will have to clean you up. I've actually yet to try the demo out on Steam Deck, and I probably should, but I'm just gonna assume it runs pretty well on Steam Deck. And lastly, Eagle Knight Paradox. It looks like my jam and I really want to try it out. The game was successfully kickstarted and it should be coming to Steam sometime in August, but there's no official Steam page yet, which I do find kind of odd given that it's supposed to release sometime this August. Whatever the case is, I'm going to give this game a shot. Also probably runs well on Steam Deck as well. Overall, it was a pretty good showcase. There were a couple of games that I've already covered, so I kind of just glossed over them, but there were a ton of new games that I'm actually kind of interested in. And so now it's time to talk about the next showcase, women-led games. As the name implies, all of these games in this showcase are from women-led studios, or majority women studios. I think I've actually talked about some of these games earlier in the video. Games like Abyss X Zero, as well as Ra Ra Boom. And I think in that entire showcase, those are the two games I want to try out the most. But another game that wasn't showcased before was a game called Solitaire. From the looks of it, it kind of looks like a sort of divination simulator. You lay out some cards, not tarot cards mind you, but some unique cards to the game, and then you interpret their meaning and then you can change the fate of certain characters. It's got an interesting hook to it and I kind of want to give this game a shot, and it probably runs well on Steam Deck. And now it's time to talk about the final showcase of the day, the Future Games Show. There's a lot that was showcased in this Games Fest, but I think there are two games in particular that really speak to me. First and foremost, of course, being Starvaders. It's a grid-based roguelike deck builder where you take the role of a mech pilot. It was actually recommended by the developer of Balatro, Local Thunk. I love giant robots and this looks like it's right up my alley. I want to give this game a shot. It probably runs well on Steam Deck. The next game I want to talk about is a game called Clockwork Ambrosia. It's a Metroidvania where you build your own guns. I really want to know how deep this system goes. What sorts of crazy concoctions can we make, whether or not they're practical or not? There are a ton of Metroidvanias these days, but the weapon building mechanic could make or break the game, and that's something I want to try out for myself. The game looks like it could run well on Steam Deck, so that covers all the showcases on June the 8th. Now let's talk about June the 9th games, Part 3. So the very first showcase on June the 9th is the official Xbox Showcase. The official Xbox Showcase is, games from Xbox and coming to Xbox, followed by a pretty massive showcase of Black Ops 6. There are a lot of big releases, and people are gonna ask me about all of these releases, whether or not they'll run on Steam Deck, and I'll give you my best guesses, so I'll just kind of gloss over all of them. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 has their anti-cheat system that does not work on Linux or Steam Deck, so no, you won't be able to play this online. Ultimately, if you want to play the game online, you'll have to play on PC or consoles, and not your Steam Deck, or at least not on SteamOS that is. Doom: The Dark Ages. Doom is known for being quite optimized. Doom Eternal could run at 60 FPS on the Steam Deck. And while this one's probably going to be more graphically demanding, id Software are really good at optimization. I do think at the very least, they'll try to make it work on Steam Deck at 60 FPS. There was no gameplay shown for State of Decay 3, so I'm just going to go on a whim and say probably doesn't run on Steam Deck. Not well, at least. There was no gameplay shown off during this event, but I'm going to go on a whim and say that Dragon Age Veilguard will not run well on Steam Deck. Starfield already doesn't run well on Steam Deck. You could get some mods to make it run better on Steam Deck, but honestly, why bother, right? Fallout 76 does run quite well on Steam Deck, so hopefully the expansion would run just as well, if not a little better, right? Clair Obscur Expedition 33 kind of looks like a modern AAA game, but it has the gameplay of a classic turn-based JRPG. You could run this game at 30 FPS and get away with it. South of Midnight definitely looks like a game that could run pretty well on Steam Deck, if you lowered the graphical details, that is. World of Warcraft runs on Steam Deck. There's plenty of guides showing you how to run WoW on Steam Deck. I don't have one because I don't play WoW, and also I don't have a WoW sub, so I'm not going to bother with it, to be honest. Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater looks really good, and I mean, I'm not really sure if it'll run well on Steam Deck. I sure hope so, but that remains to be seen, to be honest. Given the gameplay of Metal Gear Solid isn't super bombastic outside of boss battles and also cutscenes, I mean, I have reason to believe this game will run pretty well on Steam Deck. Sea of Thieves runs pretty well on Steam Deck, we know this. We've seen people do it on YouTube. I've seen people do this on YouTube as well. Flintlock Siege at Dawn looks like it could run pretty well on Steam Deck. Probably have to reduce some graphical details here and there, but I mean, I see no reason why it couldn't run well on Steam Deck. It doesn't look nearly as graphically demanding as some of the other games shown off here. Age of Mythology Retold looks like it could run well on Steam Deck, but RTSs are notoriously CPU intensive, and the Steam Deck CPU may not be able to handle late game activities. But hey, if it runs well on Steam Deck, then you can use the trackpads to play the game, which is pretty cool. Perfect Dark is returning to us, and we can play the original Perfect Dark on Steam Deck. But this is a totally new beast. This is a AAA offering, and part of me wonders if this game will run well on Steam Deck. I think it could run well if you lower the graphics, but I'm gonna go on a whim and say no otherwise. Diablo 4 runs pretty well on Steam Deck. I don't see an expansion making graphical changes that would demand a new system or even like a Steam Deck 2. But anyways, yes, Diablo 4 in its current state runs pretty well on Steam Deck, and it's a fairly popular Steam Deck game. Fable is another AAA offering, and it's hard to know what Fable will be like without Peter Molyneux. What we do know though is that Fable could probably run well on Steam Deck. Fragpunk looks like it should run well on Steam Deck, but given that this is an online competitive shooter, there might be some anti-cheat issues. Depending on if they use whatever anti-cheat supports Steam Deck and if they enable Steam Deck support, you may be able to play this game. But if they don't enable it, then you won't be able to play this game at all on Steam Deck, or at least on SteamOS that is. Both Winter Burrow and Mixtape look like they could run on Steam Deck. I don't have to say much more else, do I? I can't imagine wanting to play Microsoft Flight Simulator on Steam Deck, but there are people that do, and the previous Flight Simulator games run quite well on Steam Deck, so I'm inclined to believe that this new one will as well, albeit slightly worse due to higher graphical fidelity. The Elder Scrolls Online already runs pretty well on Steam Deck from what I've seen, so this is just an expansion announcement, don't have to worry about it. Life is Strange Double Exposure. It could run well on Steam Deck, but I have no reason to believe it won't, but also, like, it's basically a visual novel. You could run it at 30 FPS and you'll probably be fine. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. It's a major AAA offering. There's no telling if this will run well on Steam Deck. I'm gonna assume no, but I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Mecha Break. I've seen this game around. It looks pretty crazy. I want to play it on Steam Deck. It's an online multiplayer game. There's no telling if this will have anti-cheat support or not for the Steam Deck, but we'll see. But even then, will this game even run that well on Steam Deck? Maybe. Maybe not. Wu Chang Fallen Feathers looks pretty sick, and will it run on Steam Deck? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say yes, with graphics turned down. I'm not particularly interested in Avowed, but I mean, will it run well on Steam Deck? Probably. Atomfall, same deal. Probably runs well on Steam Deck. Assassin's Creed Shadow looks pretty sick. It's probably the sickest Assassin's Creed has ever looked. But the big question is, will this run well on Steam Deck? I'm gonna go on a whim and say no. It's a modern major AAA title that is massive and open world and all that cool stuff. probably won't run well on Steam Deck. Unless, Ubisoft is willing to prove me wrong. I sure hope they do. And then we have Stalker 2, which looks pretty insane. Will it run well on Steam Deck though? Maybe, maybe not. I'm gonna err on the side of maybe if you lower everything. And of course, Gears of War E-Day, the one more game. It's a prequel to the original Gears of War trilogy. And I'm just gonna say this, there's no gameplay. Will we see gameplay? I sure hope so, because I can make a better assessment that way. But without gameplay, assuming this is all in-engine, I'm gonna go on a whim and say this probably will not run well on Steam Deck. So you may be asking yourself, where do I come up with all these predictions? How do I predict things? Well, it's simple really. I make educated guesses, and sometimes I just make straight up guesses. I could be right, I could be wrong. No one knows if I'm right or wrong except for the developers. So the Xbox showcase might straight up be the best showcase we've seen this week. But there is one more presentation after the Xbox presentation, that being the PC gaming show. And it's the 10th year anniversary as well. Now this show had a lot of games. There were so many games in the show, but only a couple really interested me. And so now we're going to talk about all of those. I believe I've talked about Streets of Rage 2 in a prior video. I think the Triple I initiative, but it looks pretty sick, like an immersive sim that's top down. I want to try it out. I haven't played the original yet. Is it also like a top down immersive sim as well? Whatever the case is, I want to try this one out. This one I have faith will run pretty well on Steam Deck. Next up is a game called Wander Stars. It's essentially a JRPG, but the combat is rather different. Rather than selecting from an existing library of spells or attacks or whatever, you instead create your own. Using different words, you can determine different attack properties, such as elements or multiple hits or anything of the sort really. I don't know how far this system goes, but I'd be interested in trying it out for sure. This game will run fairly solid on Steam Deck, I'm sure of it. Next up is New Blood's Fallen Aces. I've actually covered this game in a prior demo fest. I think it was the FPS Fest? I'm not sure. Anyways, I've tried the demo out. The demo runs great on Steam Deck. The only real issue was that there's no actual controller support, so you have to create your own custom configuration. The game demands you learn how to use your weapons and your environments effectively, because the learning curve of fist fighting can be a little difficult. The game demands mastery of your move list as well as your environment. Demon School's also a game I've talked about before as well, just not in a game showcase like this. It's a game where movements are attacks, and as such positioning is far more important and far more detrimental to you, the player. I don't really know if this game will run well on Steam Deck, but I'm sure it will. I have no reason to believe that it won't, after all. Unbeatable is a game that I've actually backed on Kickstarter or whatever the equivalent was, I don't remember. All I know for certain is that it's pretty awesome. There's a free, I don't want to say demo, but a free version of the game called Unbeatable White Label, and it's freaking great. It's amazing. It is free, so there isn't too much of a story because it's just the free version of the game. And this one's actually supposed to have a story and also new songs as well, but there's plenty of songs in White Label, so I would definitely recommend playing it. White Label runs pretty well on Steam Deck, and so I have no reason to believe that this won't also run on Steam Deck. Do note that this is a rhythm game, so headphones are highly recommended. Wired headphones as well. Screenbound is a game that actually showed up prior in one of the earlier showcases, but I forgot to talk about it. Anyways, Screenbound is a game where it's both a 2D and a 3D platformer. You're essentially looking at your Game Boy the entire time playing a 2D game, but at the same time though, you're controlling your person in 3D as well. It's not the first time a game toyed with the concept of 2D and 3D. I think there are games like Fez that have done that, but this one might be interesting as well because it's not just like 2D perspectives with a 3D world that, shifts perspective and whatnot. No, it's both a 2D and a 3D world simultaneously, and it's both the same world. This game will probably run on Steam Deck. I have no reason to believe that it won't. And I think that about covers it for every single showcase. Oh wait, I forgot there was one more. That's right, Ubisoft has a showcase, but to be honest with you, I'm not going to cover that because I don't feel like it. So overall, this entire week of showcases was crazy. If I had to pick which one was a true winner, I would say Xbox had the most interesting games. But to be honest with you, it's hard to know if Xbox can ever be trusted again given what's been happening as of recently, especially with layoffs and studio shutdowns. Especially since the best-selling game on this entire showcase week is probably going to be Call of Duty. Let's be honest. Microsoft will need to show that they can be trusted again. But I can't begin to imagine how Microsoft could earn people's trust back aside from actually releasing the games that people want to be made. There were also a ton of indies this time around, but honestly, I didn't find myself that interested in most of the indies that were showcased in these game fests. It's not a knock on the indie devs, it's just a knock on me because honestly, they seem pretty cool for the people that like them, but I know for a fact that some of these games I wouldn't like. But there were definitely some indie gems in there that I really want to play. There's also my next fest coverage, which I've covered 10 demos earlier. But there's going to be 10 more demos, or maybe even more demos showcased in the follow-up video. So if you want to hear my thoughts on some next fest demos, be sure to check out those videos. There will be a link in the description down below. If you like this video, please press the like button and check out our other videos. And if you like those other videos as well, be sure to press the subscribe button and share the good gospel of high-tech lowlife with your friends. Furthermore, we have a community Discord for enlightened individuals such as you. And if you wish to further support high-tech lowlife, be sure to check out our Patreon page. Links in the description.